A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, someone nailed something to a door, and here we are.
I wish I was musically inclined enough to create a just slightly off-brand Star Wars theme out of that to loop into this.
You just steal the one from Spaceballs.
Anyway, welcome to another episode of Cross-Checking. I am your resident history nerd, according to my name tag on this podcast. I'm Pastor Ben Olschlager here in beautiful, wet Lake Orion, Michigan. With me again, as always, though, with a new honorific, the Reverend Doctor, His Most Excellence, Joshua Laborious.
That's too much. That's far too much.
The Reverend Doctor of the Dad Haircut, Josh Laborious.
For those of you who listen, you actually probably do know that I got a haircut because half of you are in my congregation. If you haven't noticed, pay closer attention.
Yeah, that's fair.
I lost like 4 pounds of hair, man.
It was way too much, in my opinion. Doesn't matter.
I had too much hair. You are correct. I had way too much hair.
You did not.
It is hot in Houston. Okay, dude. I had too much hair.
And
anyway, Canadian ways.
We are here once again to talk about faith, to talk about what it means to be Christian, but also like as our season this season, I don't know.
Season.
Period of time that is undetermined and possibly meaningless.
The rules are made up and the points don't matter.
Exactly. We're going to talk about what kind of identifying marks make a Lutheran. And we want to start with a little bit of background on how Lutherans came to be, basically. So, are you beeping or am I beeping?
It's not me. I was over here on my handy dandy whiteboard setting up a scoreboard, Ben and Josh, for the points that don't matter and the rules we make up. So,
okay.
If you ever feel any need to assign points
for most Lutheran,
sure. Also, if you as a listener want to assign points to Ben or Josh, just reach out to the show and I'll put them on the scoreboard. And at the end of the season, we shall declare my victory.
Good try. I'm already like 10 points up because my name is so much more German.
I'll give you 1 point for that. That's not what this episode's about. You don't let me distract you from your introduction about our illustrious history.
So to set the table a little bit for us this season on what makes a Lutheran, we're going to talk about a little bit of the history that got us here. And I think the first thing that we need to recognize is that we're Lutherans because of a guy named Martin Luther. So if you don't know who that is yet, go read a Wikipedia page. Or if you don't know how to get to one of those, go to your local library, find the encyclopedia. If you're looking for the L section, and go to Luther, Martin.
Not Martin Luther King.
Correct.
That's a different guy.
Correct. Yes.
Named in honor of Martin Luther, as I understand it, but
yes.
Different gentlemen.
Yes. Very, very different people. One was a 16th century Augustinian monk turned church reformer. One was a 20th century civil rights leader. Yeah.
Not an Augustinian monk.
Not an Augustinian monk. Yeah. So, Josh, where should we start with talking about the history of Lutheranism, do you think? Should we start with Luther?
No. That'd be too obvious. No, I think it's worth mentioning because there are some things that we're going to talk about with Luther, I imagine. As you listeners know, we don't necessarily plan these shows. I have a whole post-it worth of notes though, so we have direction. But with some of the things we always bring up with Luther, sometimes he gets more credit, I think, than not that he deserves, but he gets some credit that probably should be shared.
I think that's fair.
there are some people.
I was going to say, to me, Luther feels like the lightning bolt that happens to start a wildfire, even though it took like decades of dry winds and unseasonably bad conditions to get to the point where that thing could spread like it did.
Right. So and I don't have details because, as my tag says on the screen, I'm not a history guy. I did take a Reformation history class in undergrad that I passed. In any case, so sometimes Luther gets pointed to as like the first reformer, or a great reformer, and he was a great reformer in the church. But he wasn't the first person to draw attention to some of the things that he drew attention to in his 95 Theses when he was having these arguments and these conversations with the Catholic Church.
There were a few things that kind of set him apart in that, just as an aside here. One, he was kind of perfectly positioned for this because, one, he was horribly depressed, which meant he wrote the best things. Like, think of your favorite musicians. They're all horribly depressed. That makes them good.
That's not the direction I thought you were going with that, but
that makes them good. Same thing with poets and artists. The more depressed they are, the better they are. Second thing that made him good for this.
I'm gonna mute you.
What?
Hold on, I'm ready for this.
Josh gave me a yellow card.
Interrupting me with nonsense. That's what you're getting this yellow card for.
No. Second thing that made him good for this. He had a position where he could actually like reach the public square. He was a professor. So he had some level of influence. And third, he just happened to be one of the first guys that like really leaned into the invention that was the printing press. He wrote with some panache, shall we say. He liked a good spicy meme, basically. Josh follows well in his footsteps there.
I do enjoy my memery.
Yes. So
now I have to say, none of that was the direction I was going.
No, but he was entertaining to listen to. He had access to the things that could get his message wide. And he was good at it. And so when he started pointing these things out, people were like, oh, this is actually interesting to listen to. Maybe we should actually pay attention.
All of those things are true. And in addition, it's probably fair to say that his collection of reforms was somewhat unique. Like, people had come before him and had complaints about the Catholic Church, about the church in general.
And about some of the things he complained about, but not kind of...
But in these, like, one would complain about A, and one would complain about C, and the other one would complain about 4. And Luther was like, AC4.
And one of them was V.
See what I did there?
I did.
Yeah, that was an accident, but I'm happy it landed that way.
Yeah.
The other thing with Luther is sometimes he gets a lot of credit for he translated the Bible into a vernacular language. He translated the Bible into German so that regular people could read it.
The Bible predated it by 200 years.
Yeah, he wasn't the first person to do this. It's one of the things that he did, so it kind of gets tacked on to the list of things that he is famous for.
Yeah.
And the other thing that is worth mentioning that set him apart is he was fairly well connected, especially by the time things really heated up, with the German princes, which had a stake in keeping the Roman emperor from making him disappear. Because up until this is kind of the first, Luther is the first of, up until him, most of the reformers just disappeared.
They got disappeared.
Yeah, But Luther, because he was friends with people who had castles and armies, went and hid in said castles behind said armies and was able to get to a point where killing him wouldn't have accomplished anything. Because the ideas were already out there, the box was kind of open. So it's worth, as we get ready to talk about Luther and the history of Lutheranism, the history of Lutheran identity, and the part that history plays into that. It is worth mentioning Luther was the perfect storm. He wasn't the first. And I think that'll probably come up in our conversation later. The other thing that's worth mentioning is, especially if you're listening to this and you're not Lutheran, and hopefully this isn't news to you if you are Lutheran, but maybe it will be. We don't worship Luther. We don't even say everything he ever wrote is great. We owe a lot of credit to him, but it's in the same way as like a college might name something after a donor. It's like, we really appreciate what you did donating for this building, so we're going to name the building after you, but like it's not a universal stamp of approval on the donor. In the same way, we're Lutheran because our roots are in what he wrote and what he did with some of the other reformers. And we owe him a lot for the theological tradition that he crystallized for us. Yeah. However, he was just a dude. We don't worship him. And there are some things he wrote that were like...
Yeah. He went more than a little...
That's not a good one.
He went more than a little senile at the end, and wrote some pretty crazy things. And I don't know
if it was senile or if he just got grouchier and grouchier.
There was a little bit of both. He got... I don't remember which of the major...
With that. Grouchy and senile.
He got one of the major, like, you don't really recover from this illnesses of that day that like very much changed his mental state. I don't remember what it was. But yeah, there's a turning point in his writing where you're like, he might just be angry and slightly crazy now. So full transparency, it got to the point where some of that stuff was like used as support for the Nazi regime during World War II. It was not great. So we like Luther for a lot of the things that he pointed out that like the church was doing wrong and the church needed to do better, but he's not a perfect man.
No.
So that was kind of the Lutheran Church's starting point. I think it's probably good that we talk about what Luther was responding to in the church's history that really kind of got him ticked off while he was still good and ticked off, not bad.
Yeah, it was a righteous ticked off.
Yeah, exactly. So first one, and this is what everybody knows him for, is nailing the 95 theses to the castle church door in Wittenberg, was just plain old corruption. Everybody's favorite flavor of ice cream in Chicago, Illinois. Am I wrong? Prove to me that I'm wrong. How many of their former governors and mayors in Illinois
all I can think of when you say that is a basketball player named Joakim Noah, who was on record saying, they don't like me in Cleveland, but no one likes Cleveland. You ever heard someone say, I'm going on vacation to Cleveland? Cleveland isn't cool. There's a whole video. It's a hilarious interview. Joakim Noah, he played for the Bulls for a while. University of... I know all this because he was my roommate in college, John Martz's favorite player. Which is weird because he was fine, but he wasn't that good. Anyway,
he wasn't good.
So when you say that corruption is Chicago's favorite flavor of ice cream, all I could think of is Cleveland is not cool.
Yeah. I mean, I was referencing how many of Chicago's former mayors and the state of Illinois' former governors have spent time in prison recently. Because it's a lot. Like, it's an unreasonably large number.
Anyway. Here's how you tell if your sign is cheap.
Anyway, so Luther gets mad about...
I get a point for that, by the way.
Luther gets mad about corruption. Because the Catholic Church just won't stop telling people that they can buy their way to heaven. And Josh, I'm pretty sure that I've read my Bible, probably 15 times or so at this point, cover to cover. And I've never come across something that says you can buy your way to heaven. How about you?
No, I haven't, because it's not in there.
Okay. Glad we could double check and agree on this. The way that the Catholic Church was doing that was through this thing called indulgences. They had this guy named Johann Tetzel that sounds like pretzel because that's what he had to do to get you to buy these things, is put you in a mental pretzel.
I have a feeling that's not the first time you've said that.
It is actually the first time I've said that. I just wasn't sure what I was following that up with. But he would go around and sell these pieces of paper that said, "Hey, you or your loved ones can get out of purgatory, this fictional place that does not exist, that's supposed to cleanse your soul, for the unreasonable price of like half of your net worth." And what is this money going toward? Of course, the church. And by the church, I mean paying for a really big fancy building in Rome that the church doesn't really need, but it still looks really cool. It's still there, and it looks really cool, but we didn't need it. So
St. Peter's Basilica, for anyone who's not following.
Yeah. The one that was it Michelangelo hung from the ceiling of and painted all the frescoes on? I think that was who it was.
Maybe? I don't know.
Yeah. It's pretty. I'll give this to the Catholics. When they spend their money, they spend it on good stuff. But they weren't spending their money. They were spending a bunch of poor Germans' money, and that pissed off Luther.
I think, I don't know if this is, I don't know where I'm remembering this from. I think part of it was also, with that as a backdrop, he went and visited Rome and saw priests and bishops and cardinals and leaders in the church doing things they really shouldn't have been doing. And he saw the poor stewardship of what the church had. So he was looking at all this and saying, they're spending all this money on gold-plated whatever at the expense of the German. I mean, not just the German people, but that was Luther's experience because that's where he was from.
Yeah, but it was also largely the German people because of the main rulers in play in the day. And this is an incredibly nerdy aside that none of you really cared about, but I want to tell you about because reasons. There were a couple of big players. There was the French king, and then there was Charles, who was the Holy Roman Emperor at the time. He's the guy that Luther had to hide from in castles using, I have army diplomacy. And the Pope was worried about Charles and the French king. Wasn't really worried about anybody else. And Charles, in order to make the Pope like him, said, "Yeah, you can tax all of the German people, but I'm from Spain and my family all lives in Austria, so don't touch those because we like those places. But all those, annoying and insolent Germans, tax the snot out of them." I don't care. So that's what they did. They taxed the snot out of the Germans. And Luther's like, "Hey, this isn't fair. B, you're a prick. Stop it." Yeah. So he started writing some basically topics for debate on the legality and theological correctness of the indulgences, and that's what he posted on the church door in Wittenberg, and people were like, "Oh, this is sweet. I like this. Maybe we shouldn't be paying the church money that we don't have." And then it spread like wildfire, and the Catholic Church got mad because their piggy bank got touched.
Yeah. Well, and what happened then is these 95, it's not all 95 theses about indulgences. It does start to get into a little bit of church authority. And if the Pope has this authority to free people from purgatory, why doesn't he just do it for everyone? All of the sacred cows of the Catholic Church at the time, Luther touched all of those, and they reacted as you would expect.
You don't want me to touch this cow? Let me poke. You don't want me to touch this cow? I'll poke this one too. Luther's basically like a 3-year-old.
A very well-educated 3-year-old.
A very, very well-educated 3-year-old.
We have these historical roots, and then there's this back and forth with him and different Catholic theologians. And as a result of that, the Book of Concord gets put together. We did a whole season talking on that, where Luther and his contemporaries really have to nail down what do we believe to be true. And that's I don't know if I'm hijacking this, but Ben can always take it back if he needs to. But that's the core of our historical roots as like if you're going to say what is the historic Lutheran identity, it's rooted in kind of that reformation to what is right and what is faithful, what we can prove with Scripture. But then there's some more recent history, and I don't know if this is fair game. I don't think it falls into our other categories, but more recent history in Lutheranism and in the LCMS that does play into what is our Lutheran identity. So you have the Lutherans that came over from Germany to the United States. A large part of the reason they were coming over is so that they could practice Christianity more faithfully, because they saw different things in Germany with how involved the state was, with how things were going. They said this isn't a faithful expression of Christianity, so they left and they came to the United States because the whole big thing is you can practice religion however you want over here. And then you have an early instance where Martin Stephan, right? That was the first guy. He is the bishop of the Lutheran Church down in America, and he is wildly corrupt. And he sleeps with a whole bunch of ladies he's not supposed to. And they find out, and they literally ship him across the river. They make him leave.
They thought that hell was Illinois, as we've already established in this episode.
If you're from Illinois, I will pass along any hate mail you want straight to Ben, and we'll do it. Anyway, and one of his mistresses went with him, which is a detail that I always found fascinating. And then they had this crisis of identity of like, who our leader is gone. Who are we? Can we still call ourselves the church? Whatever. And that's where CFW Walther steps up, and he is kind of, I think most people would point to him as like, this is the patriarch, the progenitor of the LCMS. Long before it was called.
And Wilhelm Walther.
Not the most handsome guy in the world, but he was a faithful guy.
Pictures of him from late in his life. Ooh, baby. That's a face only after a
piece of history.
Not even then.
Then, as you get into the church becoming the LCMS, it's a very missional church. So you see, the LCMS at one point was planting like a church a day in America, just going wild. You have the development of seminaries and schools and universities, and so there's this educational element that is part of our history. But then maybe the most recent watershed moment of LCMS history is Seminex. And that was 1950s, right?
70. 71.
Where there were some, I'm going to paint this in broad strokes because I haven't learned really specific details. I didn't know it existed until I went to the seminary. But Seminex, short for Seminary in Exile, happened. Some of the professors at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis, where Ben and I graduated from, were teaching things they probably shouldn't have been teaching. So they shouldn't have been doing that. At the same time, the Synod then came in and tried to deal with that problem in a way that wasn't very reconciliatory. So there was probably also some fault on that side of how they approached it. But what happened is the professors were dismissed, and a large part of the student body walked out. It's called the walkout. They walked out. They went down the street.
Creative.
Huh?
Really creative as Lutherans.
Yeah, we're never just on the nose about stuff. But they walked down the street a little bit with some of these disgraced professors, and they start Seminary in Exile. And that group, that movement, after a couple different iterations and whatever, became what is today the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. While those who remain, it went through, I think it was the LCA, and then they joined with another. So like
they became part of what became the EALC, which was the smallest of the three church bodies that joined together to form the ELCA. Though there's been some, I think, pretty reasonable arguments to say that they had an undue amount of influence on the formation of the ELCA and had an undue amount of influence on the ELCA becoming what the ELCA is today, and that is
Wild.
something of a meme itself. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's part of our history as well, and especially in older generations of the clergy and the leadership of the LCMS, that is very much, it's something that lives rent free in their head. And
Yeah.
it's something that's always, I got a publication mailed to me last week, Seminex 2.0, and I read parts of it, and I was like, this guy is out of his mind. But I saw it was published by the same people who publish Christian news, and I was like, oh, well, that explains that.
Yeah. So, worth noting that one of the things that people like will so often point to as a part of Lutheran identity is the fact that we can kind of trace our roots back. Because what Josh was talking about with Seminex,
Apostolic succession.
not quite. Yes, but not quite. We don't, yeah. Apostolic succession to the theology, not to the people, and we're okay with that.
Yeah, we have passed down the teachings of the apostles. Apostolic succession. What else could I possibly mean by that, Ben?
You could mean an offense to Catholics everywhere, Josh.
Okay, someone who has twice offended anyone who lives in the state of Illinois.
Yes, but people from Illinois deserve it. Our Catholic brothers and sisters get enough crap from Lutherans all the time.
Okay, I will concede that. The second part of that point. I'm sitting here busy feeling bad for people who live in Illinois because they have to live in Illinois.
You know, that's fair.
On them too.
That's fair. You know, knowing all of this, God's going to see fit to send me to Illinois for my next call.
That would be hilarious.
It would be hilarious.
I would pull up this episode and send it to you every day for 2 weeks.
Yeah, just snippets of this. Anyway, in Seminex, one of the big things that Lutherans overcame was a desire to do something new and dismiss history. In the formation of the LCMS, one of the things that Lutherans sought to do was overcome heretical thought and teaching that they thought was coming into the church in Germany, which dismissed history as they saw it. One of the things that Luther was trying to do was look back at the historic writings and understandings of the church and get back to that, because it had been dismissed by things that were coming into the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. And so a big part of what a Lutheran is just historically understands the church. Like, we lean into the best of our ability what the church has always known, understood, and stood for. And so, like, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're just trying to be the faithful church. And along the way, that ruffles some feathers because we look out of touch and whatever else you want to say about that. But we don't care, to be frank.
No, German, not Frank.
Well, the Franks were Germanic.
You're Germanic.
You're right.
Boom. So I think, and again, I might hijack this conversation, but I'm okay with that. It's never stopped me before. I think it's worth noting, because you, as a listener, you're listening to this and you're thinking, okay, like, it's good to know where we come from and what our history is, but what does that mean for our identity? Other than we appreciate history and we have this history that we try to be faithful to, because ultimately that history points us back to Jesus, it points us back to the scripture and faithful interpretations thereof. Okay? So, and that's a foundational and important part. But also, I would suspect we picked up a lot of our institutional attitudes from our history. So just a couple examples that come to mind, and then Ben can add to this list, I'm sure. Luther was a righteous rebel. And I think we see a little bit of that in ourselves. We like to think we speak truth to power and such things. And that we'll talk about that in other episodes, kind of how weirdly politically active the LCMS is in certain instances, because we're speaking the truth of Scripture to either cultural or political authorities. From Also from Luther and from Melanchthon, we picked up a priority for education. And you see Lutheran schools all over the place, and they tend to be excellent. Like, they're great, faithful schools, but they're also centers for educational excellence. That is part of our history. That's always been a priority for Lutherans.
I went to a Lutheran high school, and our motto was striving for perfection to achieve excellence.
I like that.
Right?
I like that a lot. Then you look forward a little bit to the incident with Martin Stephan and CFW Walther. We are a grassroots organization. We do not tend to trust centralized authority. And I wonder if part of that is we look at our history and we say, well, the Pope was a central authority. That didn't work out. Martin Stephan was a centralized authority. That didn't work out. So,
I mean, the German emperor was a central authority who had too much influence on the church. That didn't work out.
That's why, So that's baked in. And you still see that even in how the Synod, the national organization of the LCMS, and I know we've done an episode on this before too. We're getting to the point where almost anything I talk about, we've talked about somewhere. The Synod can't tell congregations to do a whole lot. There are certain maybe theological exceptions to that, like avoid heresy. That's something the Synod can say. You have to do that. But most of it is left in the hands of individual congregations. How they're going to operate on a day-to-day basis, how they're going to go about the ministry in their context. And I think part of that is because we have this historic list of reasons to distrust centralized authority. Centralized institutional authority, I guess, is another qualifier. And then even as recent as Seminex, there is kind of a lot of hesitation with new ideas and with interacting with people who we don't have this same theological conviction of. And I think some of that can be traced back to Seminex. And like, hey, last time we played too much in the sandbox with everybody else, we walked away with a disease, which is a dramatic way to put it. But
it was probably all the cat poop from the neighborhood strays.
That's why everybody needs a couple good big dogs around.
Or just a cover for your sandbox. Or both.
Or both. Both works too.
I'm an advocate for both. But also, like, if your kid gets sick, it's just good for their immune system.
Ran really far into that metaphor, but that's okay. And then you just have the fundamental, like Luther and Melanchthon were both doctors, and they were both nerds, and that heritage has kind of been passed down, and I think that's actually one of the episodes we have scheduled for this season, is that Lutherans tend to be nerds. So yeah, I think those are just some institutional attitudes and characteristics that are very typical of Lutherans, of LCMS Lutherans especially, and I think at least in part it is because this is in our collective memory. We have these experiences that we have reacted to. And I don't think any of those is unfair. I think you see all of the things in our history and you're like, there's a little bit of distrust for authority. And I'm like, you know what? That's probably fair. Ask some questions. Make sure you follow up on stuff. Yeah. Is there anything you want to add to that, Ben?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of the big ones. You look at our history and it's like when you meet somebody for the first time and you're like, there's something slightly off about them. And then you learn from friends, like, where that person has come from. And you're like, that makes so much more sense now. That's basically like what history has done to the Lutheran Church in like a more significant way than I think it has for a lot of other church bodies. Like, we are so tied to our history that the great things about it and the scars show up, I think, pretty surface level. And it, again, can be a great thing, but it can also be a problem. Because, like, there's a statement that I've heard a number of Lutheran pastors use, and Josh heard it from me for the first time, and agrees it's one of the most Lutheran things he's ever heard, that we like to claim that we are the Catholic Church, but not Roman, and the Orthodox Church, but not Eastern. In other words, we think
You're right.
We're right. We're the correct expression of the church. We are the historic and correct expression of the church, which is an incredibly bold thing to say for a church body that really didn't exist until a monk in the 1500s got scared of a thunderstorm.
Well, you can say that unless you say this church has existed the whole time. It's just we had to give it a new name.
So, like,
and I might be just showing my Lutheranism here.
I'm with you.
Disagree with that statement.
I'm with you. I'm with you that the reason that we are
if I didn't
here
think we were right, I wouldn't be Lutheran anymore.
We think we're right, but our history again plays into the fact that we think we're right, and the fact that we are going to go back to history to point to the fact that we think we're right. So, like, on some level, I think it kind of, we use it both ways. We use the history to prove the point that we're correct, and then we also try to bury some of the history because it shows, like, why we are the scatterbrained, nerdy, kind of nobody wants to deal with us kids that we are.
I don't know what you mean.
You know exactly what I mean, Josh. You know it because you are one of them.
I am what you mean.
I am exactly what you mean, or what I mean. You are.
I'm not part of the problem. I am the whole problem.
I mean, me too. For reference, Josh and I are both like descended from church work families. Josh has what? 5 generations?
You have to get a little. So my dad is a pastor, and then my maternal grandfather is a pastor. But if you're willing to cross over like that, then it goes back another 4 generations.
Yeah. In my family, on my dad's side, you go back to my great grandfather. He and his wife were Lutheran school teachers, and then like back down that line a ton, there were a bunch of school teachers, pastors, other lay leaders in the church, like just a lot of history. And then on my mom's side, I've got a Lutheran kindergarten teacher and other Lutheran, like heavily involved Lutheran lay leaders. So we couldn't escape it. Our history caught up to us.
I'm okay with it. I like what I do.
Me too. But like, we are the living example of what we mean by this. That we cannot escape our history as the Lutheran Church, but honestly, we kind of love it.
Yeah, there's that whole phrase, if you don't know your history, you're doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
We know our history, and we're okay with repeating it.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to kind of summarize all of this. Yeah.
So the question, these are all different things that this kind of contributes to. What does it mean to be Lutheran? And as you're listening, some of this might apply to you, some of it might not. I'm not saying that it's a gauge for how Lutheran you are, but maybe there's a little bit of that. I think it depends on what parts you're like. That doesn't, like, if you're not rebellious, you can still be Lutheran and not be rebellious. You can still be Lutheran and not trust centralized authority. If you say, I don't really look to a historic and orthodox understanding of what it means to be Christian, then we'd be like, okay, now our Lutheranism is a little bit more. That's not very Lutheran of you.
Yeah.
To skip out on that part.
Yeah. But speaking in broad generalities, a lot of these other things that Lutherans have run into in their history really, really point to where we're at today. And I think maybe one kind of closing thing, if you're ready to start moving into empty netters here, Josh.
I mean, the only thing I had left on my handy-dandy little note card was, is this a problem?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think we've already kind of talked about some of this stuff. Like, some of the same stuff that we hold up as, like, hey, look at this time where we, did whatever, also becomes a problem. Because, like, so take the centralized authority piece. We love to point to the fact that Luther stood up to the centralized authority of the Catholic Church. We love to point out that when the LCMS was being founded, Martin Stephan got kicked out, and like all of the laity stood up to the centralized authority of their pastor and said, no thanks, keep it in your pants. And we love to point out that like the LCMS zagged when the world was zigging. And like, but at the same time, that also means that like when somebody within our own church body who is a faithful leader comes along and is like, hey guys, I think we should make some changes that will benefit the church. 80% of the congregations will go, no, we like our carpet red. And the guy goes, I didn't say anything about the carpet. And they're like, too bad, shut up, leave us alone. And like, that kind of thing happens all over the place in our polity, which is our church structure and governance and stuff. And in the way that we interact with one another, it can be a problem. So when it comes to a lot of this stuff, you got to approach Lutherans with some patience, because
they're a bunch of stubborn old Germans, and again, not all of them, but
and sinners, just like everybody else.
Yeah. And it's the time.
There's a bunch of Scandinavians. To Josh's point, there's a bunch of Scandinavians and Ethiopians and Malagasy people, and
I think this historical element to our identity only becomes a problem when the peripheral historical stuff starts to become too much of a priority. What is important from our historical identity is that we share the orthodox teachings of the church, of the biblical church, of the apostolic church. And we continue in those teachings. And when we start to take some of the other stuff and say, well, and make it really, really important, that's when it can start to become a problem. Whether that is our hesitation about new ideas or new applications of old ideas, or whether that is our distrust of authority or a rebellious streak, or like you name it. Those can be fine, but if they start to become a core part of our identity over and above our biblical identity, they have become problems. So
yeah. It was did you guys speak the Athanasian Creed last Sunday, Josh?
Yep.
So it was Trinity Sunday last Sunday as we're recording this. And the opening line to the Athanasian Creed, I think jars some people every time we read it, but I love it.
Catholic?
Yeah, well, not just that, but in order to be saved, one must keep the faith Catholic, and the faith Catholic is this. If you can't find the thing that you're upset about in the 2 pages of our hymnal that is the Athanasian Creed, and it's like 40 plus lines, shut up, because it's not essential for salvation, and we can have a real conversation about it and not just a hissy fit.
Yeah. All right, I think I'm ready for empty netters. I have no more profound reflections.
Me too.
I don't know if I had any profound reflections in the first place, but
yeah. Oh, I'll make my empty netter this. If you want to know more about Lutheran church history, there's a couple of great resources for you. I love I think it was put out in 2017 with the 500th anniversary, A Man Named Martin documentary that somehow the ELCA, LCMS, and Wells got together to put out. Don't understand how they pulled that off, but
is that the one John Player was involved with?
No, maybe? Not to my knowledge. That was the CFW Walther thing.
I think you're right.
Yeah. Still one of the most scarring things I've ever watched.
You actually watched it.
I did. Anyway,
my empty netter, I think, is it's good to know where you come from. Just keep everything in perspective. So,
yeah.
And my joking empty netter is that right now the score on my board is tied, and I think I'm with or without Ben's approval, I'm going to make it a thing this season. If you're listening to this show at any given point in any episode this season, you can comment or you can reach out to one of us with assigning a point with your reason. It doesn't have to be a good reason. It can be an arbitrary reason, like Josh finally straightened up his jersey or something like that. And I will put the point on the board. And at the end of the season, we will, in fact, reveal the tally. I'll probably keep a running update. But there's my takeaway empty netter, is that we're tied, and that cannot stand. So, with all that nonsense being said, brothers and sisters, go in peace. Serve the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Thank Thank you for listening in to this episode of Cross-Checking, a ministry of Hope and Good Shepherd Lutheran Churches, where we strive to deepen your understanding of the faith and help apply it to daily life. If this podcast is helpful to you, rate the podcast, subscribe to us on your favorite platform, and share it with others who might also gain something from it.